I want to welcome we have some first-time visitors here today. You picked kind of a weird week to come a little bit. There's not usually quite this wall of red and gray up here. I know Michiganders aren't used to seeing this much red and gray in one place except for every other year in Ann Arbor. But it's a little bit of an unusual service today, but I think you'll get a flavor of things, and obviously we hope we'll see you again. Thank you all. Thanks everybody for coming. I appreciate it. Especially this time of year. I mean, lots of people have lots of stuff going on now, right? We're in the sort of the midst of this winter holiday season, right? Things get kind of intense and people get really busy. And for a lot of people, for a lot of different reasons, this period kind of from Thanksgiving and then through Christmas and New Year, it can be kind of a challenging time of the year, right? It can be kind of challenging emotionally. And one of the things that contributes to the stress a little bit is all the stuff we're kind of exposed to, all the stuff you see and hear. You got the songs and the stories and the Hallmark Channel movies and all this kind of stuff. That seems to make it seem like this season of the year should be just sort of joyous and bright and everybody should be all happy, and which can just kind of aggravate your state of mind if that doesn't sort of fit too well, or if that's kind of not the state that you're in. I think that's kind of a specific example of a bigger challenge that we have to deal with in our lives. So what I want to talk about today is I want to talk a little bit about the idea of suffering and the role that popular culture can play in kind of adding to it. And along the way, I'm going to look at a little bit of some of the words that we use when we talk about Buddhist ideas in English that can maybe give us a little bit of a misleading idea and can contribute to things a little bit. I want to start with, I think the most explicit statement of my point here comes from a movie. In 2000, there was this movie came out that starred John Cusack. He played the owner of a record store. It was called High Fidelity, if any of you have seen this movie, High Fidelity. And right at the beginning of the film, this is the way the film starts. So it's kind of he's listening to music on his headphones, and there's this close-up on his face, and he says, "What came first, the music or the misery?" People worry about kids playing with guns or watching violent video games, that some sort of culture of violence will take them over. Nobody worries about kids listening to thousands, literally thousands of songs about heartbreak, rejection, pain, misery, and loss. Did I listen to pop music because I was miserable? Or was I miserable because I listened to pop music? So at the risk of being a buzzkill for your holiday season, I want you to think about misery for a few minutes. You can't talk about Buddhism without thinking about misery, because in a sense, understanding misery and what to do about it was kind of the Buddha's central mission. I mean, that was what motivated the guy, right? You can see that if you look at the very first teaching that the record says that the Buddha gave, you can really see that. Anybody who's been exposed to anything about Buddhism has probably heard of the Kadvari Anyat Satani. In Korean, it's called the Sasongje. In English, that's usually translated as the Four Noble Truths. It's presented as one of the basic teachings of Buddhism. That term, though, Four Noble Truths, that's a little bit misleading of a term. It would be more accurate to probably say the four truths known by those who are noble, or maybe the four ennobling truths, because the Buddha would say that the truths aren't noble. The Buddha would say that these are just facts. This is just how the world works. This is just what life is like. But by understanding these truths at a really deep level, we become noble. It's not that the truths are noble, the truths make us noble if we understand them and kind of can figure out how to live our lives in a way that's consistent with them. Now, the first of these truths is the truth of dukkha. In Korean, it's called ko. The most common word that we use in English to express this idea is suffering. Now, that's a little bit of a problem too, because the word suffering, first of all, it tends to make people think primarily about physical pain, maybe not kind of emotional, psychological pain. And even if people do think about emotional, psychological pain, they tend to think about kind of big stuff, kind of big things. Another problem is people tend to just, when you say the word suffering, people just think about it in terms of bad stuff happens and you suffer. When what the Buddha says is that good stuff leads to suffering too if we get attached to good stuff, because good things don't last. So therefore, that causes suffering too in the long run if you get attached to those things, because they inevitably end. So in that sense, it probably would be better to translate dukkha as dissatisfaction or unsatisfactoriness. Now, if you look at the way the Buddha explained this, and the very first teaching that, again, the record records that the Buddha gave after his enlightenment, the Dharma Chakra Pavartana Sutra, the turning of the wheel of Dharma Sutra. This is what history records that he said. Birth is dukkha, aging is dukkha, sickness is dukkha, death is dukkha. To be conjoined with what one dislikes is dukkha, and to be separated from what one likes is dukkha. Not to get what one wants is dukkha. In short, grasping at the five aggregates is dukkha. Now, as I understand it, if you look at this, kind of the origin of the word, if you go back to the ancient Indian languages and you look at the origin of the word, dukkha is actually referring to kind of a metaphor. So think about it this way. Imagine that you're riding on a cart or a wagon and pulled by an ox or a horse or something. And it's, the wagon's got wheels, the cart has wheels. And imagine that one of the wheels is bad, right? It's out of round, it's got a bump on it, it's got a loose axle, there's something wrong with one of the wheels. So as you're riding down the road, as that wheel turns, you just kind of keep getting jostled. It's just not, you just can't settle in, you just can't settle into a smooth ride. It's just sort of fundamentally irritating. It's just this constant experience. You just sort of can't be calm in life because there's things keep jostling you, right? And that's kind of the metaphor that the Buddha is talking about when he uses the word Buddha. It's like there are things in life that are just kind of fundamentally irritating, right? That's kind of the big idea. Now, why is that? The Buddha also taught that dukkha is not sort of inherent in the world. It's more a result of how we understand and think about the world and think about our lives and think about the experiences that we have. So in that same sutra, he says that the samudaya of dukkha, the cause of it, the origin of dukkha, is what he calls trishna. In Korean, it's just trishna. And usually, again, when we talk about that in English, we usually translate that as thirst or craving or desire. Or in other words, it's kind of it's a discontentedness, right? It's a discontentedness with things as they are. We want disliked things to stop and go away. We want for liked things to stay and never change. We find life to be kind of irritating and fundamentally dissatisfying, primarily because we have expectations, right? And we take for granted that our expectations are going to be met, that we're entitled for our expectations to get met. And then when they're not met, we're disappointed, right? So the culture, right? The question then becomes, does our culture and the products of our culture make this tendency better or worse? And my suspicion is that it's worse. If you look at popular culture, lots of things in popular culture kind of foment this. They encourage us to have kind of these unrealistic expectations that further feed into our desire for things and just create more of this dissatisfaction. I'm going to focus on music since that's kind of what I started with, but I suspect if you could reach the same conclusion if you looked at other things about pop culture, if you looked at movies and TV shows and all sorts of things. Pop songs, among other creations of our culture, generally encourage us to be dissatisfied with our cars, with our wealth, with our looks. They tend to teach us to have unrealistic expectations about things in our lives. But since the preponderance of pop songs are about love, sex, and romance, the main thing that they make us dissatisfied with is our relationships with each other and how good they should be and what we should be getting out of them and all that sort of thing. They have a tendency to present sort of a real idealized view of love and romance to turn love into this mystical state, putting the beloved on this pedestal. They actually usually encourage this view. You can see lots of this in other places in popular culture too. This view that there's the one. There's the one that's right for everybody. The notion of a soulmate, the ridiculous idea of a soulmate. If we can blame Aristotle for inventing that. Aristotle's idea that people used to have two heads and 4 arms and 4 legs, and at some point we got split, and that's how we get male and female, and the whole point is to try to find the person that used to be the other half of you, and it's metaphysically just nutty. But pop songs promote that idea, that there's the one, and you're supposed to be finding the one, and once you find the one, it's all magical. And a consequence of that notion of a soulmate, that the idea of the one, is that if you're in a relationship, the minute it's not perfect, well, then this must not be the one, and I need to keep looking, because I haven't found the one yet, and move on to greener pastures and keep looking for the one, like, we're all living in the Matrix, if that's the case, all looking for the one. Pop songs also have a tendency to fetishize misery by making it kind of noble to have heartbreak, to have suffering in that sense. If you believe the pop songs, then everybody's got a hungry heart, right? And if desire and hunger is the fire I breathe, then misery must be part of the process of looking for love and finding the one. If love and romance don't hurt so good, then you must not be doing it right. All these sorts of things. There's an American Theravadan monk named Bhikkhu Nayana Sabano, who wrote an essay, Nothing Higher to Live for, a Buddhist View of Romantic Love, is the name of the essay. And I want to read you a paragraph out of this. Many take it on faith that romantic love is the highest thing to live for. Popular literature, movies, art, and music tirelessly celebrate it as the one truth accessible to all. Such love obliterates reason, as poets have long sweetly lamented, and this is part of its charm and power because we want to be swept up and spirited out of our calculating selves. Want is the key word, for in the spiritual void of modern life, the wanting of love becomes increasingly indistinguishable from love itself. So powerful, so insistent is it that we seldom notice that the gratification is rare and the craving relentless. Love is mostly in anticipation. It is an agony of anticipation. It is an ache for a completion not found in the dreary round of mundane routine. That we never seem to possess it in its imagined fullness does not deter us. It hurts so bad that it must be good. And I think part of the reason for this, part of what contributes to this, is the fact that the period in our lives when we're most likely to be interested in and susceptible to the influence of things like pop songs is when we're teenagers, when we're at our most emotional, our most hormonal, our least rational. We're still trying to understand this whole adult phenomenon of love and romance and all these things. But if we internalize the lessons of those songs in our formative years, and then we carry that sort of into our adulthood, we got sort of these sort of self-defeating ideas that we're sort of building our adult lives on. I picked on Bruce Springsteen a minute ago. If you didn't pick up on some of the lyrics I was quoting a minute ago, it was Bruce Springsteen. But I'm thinking about my own life, and I got to say, who's to blame for my misery? Well, mostly it's me, but a little bit of it's got to be Steve Perry and Neil Schon, if those are names that mean anything to you. Because I can't help but think if I'd spent less time in the 80s, I grew up in the 80s. I'm a child of the Reagan years. If I'd spent less time in the 80s listening to Journey songs, and treating them like they were some sort of roadmap or instruction manual for romance, which was just idiotic, I think I would have caused myself and other people around me a lot less heartache. I'd have probably been a better boyfriend and have probably been a better husband and subsequently, had a lot less misery in my own life as a result. Obviously, I'm generalizing enormously here. Not all popular music is filled with emotional landmines, but the rare song that has a more nuanced or more reasonable, less tumultuous presentation of love and romance, it's not going to hit the top 10 on the charts. It's not going to have the same popular appeal. No one will ever want to whisper the lyrics to that song as they're staring deeply into their eyes of their prom date. That's never going to happen. So again, this is a narrow example of a bigger issue, I think, in terms of culture. Just coincidentally, as I was driving up here yesterday, there was a segment on NPR. They were doing a bit about, I think it was on Radiolab, they were doing a bit about the millennial generation, which is my kids' generation, sort of kids born from about 1985 to about, 2000 or something like that. And the degree of hopelessness that people in that age group often feel, that they were born in the sort of at the height of the AIDS epidemic, and now there's COVID, and right when they were born was when we were starting to realize that we're destroying the planet, and now that's just gotten worse, and all these sort of things, and there's a lot of hopelessness apparently among millennials. And at one point, the interviewer asked, they had a guest on, and the interviewer asked the guest, "Did 90s TV set us up to be sad?" And what he was talking about was the idea of if you were alive in the 90s, and you think about especially sitcoms, there were a lot of family sitcom TV shows in the 90s, Full House, and that ABC, Thank God It's Friday, sort of family-oriented sitcoms in the 90s. And if you sort of took those shows as a representation of what life is like, you would think there's no problem that can't be solved in 25 minutes. A 25-minute set, and there's nothing that can go wrong that you can't work out in 25 minutes of a sitcom, if you take those things as gospel. Part of what we should be doing as we're walking the Buddhist path is examining our conditioning, right? Looking deeply at how our experiences have shaped how we understand ourselves and how our lives go and how the world works and all these things. Among those experiences would be our encounters with popular culture, right? And what are the lessons that we've learned? What lessons might we have internalized from popular culture? And are they skillful lessons? Are they beneficial lessons? Or are they doing us some harm in the way they've, well, to quote from that person, have they set us up to be sad? That's an interesting question. Have they distorted our minds in unskillful ways? So as you're going through the rest of the holiday season, listening to all the Christmassy, winter wonderlandy songs and the holiday movies, It's a Wonderful Life, Die Hard, whatever you think a holiday movie is, we need to examine the lessons we're getting from our culture. We need to see if they're encouraging Krishna, if they're encouraging unskillful expectations. And so whether for the sake of our Buddha way, we need to resist those things and try to find where we've internalized those lessons and try to dig them out and replace them with something that's going to be more skillful and work better for us. Sangbala Shipshiyo, may you and all beings manifest enlightenment. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend J.